Smiegocki and I will take the liberty of, for just the first few minutes, telling you a little bit about what we've been discovering about indigent defense services in rural places, and why it is, in other words, that we are concerned to have this conversation today. Here at the Deason Center, we do research in broadly three areas. The first is indigent or public defense, which is what we're discussing today. We do various work on public defense. We are very interested in the kinds of decisions that defense attorneys make, what makes them effective and ineffective. We're also interested in often the local politics that are behind decisions on actually policy making in the public defense area. Both of those kinds of questions are related to this idea of public defense in rural areas. We also do some research on prosecution decision making, particularly early stage prosecution decision making, meaning things like the prosecution's decision to decline to charge a case, for example, if they feel that the evidence is insufficient. And our third area of focus, which also overlaps with what we're talking about today, is what we call Starr justice, is small town, tribal and rural areas. We look at criminal justice systems in those kinds of contexts. On the premise that criminal justice and criminological research in rural areas is an underdeveloped field, much of it having been done in large cities heretofore. So that's what the Center does. Today, obviously, we're talking about the right to counsel in rural areas. And the reason we're doing that is because we recognize, obviously, that to counsel is a uniform right in the law. If you were to read the Sixth Amendment and then the jurisprudence followed of the Supreme Court, there is a fairly there is implicitly a consistent right to counsel for people who are unable to afford a lawyer, who are criminal defendants in cases. And that should be equally as true for you wherever you are situated in the country, more or less. But we also recognize that, logistically speaking, actually supplying to counsel, actually getting attorneys in contact with defendants, clearly differs in how easily it can be done in different parts of the country. And in particular, when you are in rural parts of the country, getting lawyers into contact with defendants, having those lawyers be able to provide the kind of services that they want to provide, and having those defendants get ultimately the kinds of services and the kinds of outcomes that they ought to be getting, may just be a different kind of challenge than it is when you are situated in an urban area. And so that's the reason that we wanted to talk to the public defenders who are on the call with us today about how they do what it is that they do, in recognition that it's likely that they have different kinds of experiences than people in other sorts of settings. A preliminary piece of research into this question, I published last year a paper that actually examined rates that people are able to access counsel in rural Texas, and this visual that's on the screen may be immediately a little bit too much information, but just through a moment. On the left, what you see are the non-rural counties in Texas. There are 82 of them, to them that we were using, and you can see this kind of bell-shaped curve where there are some counties on the left where the rate at which people are accessing counsel is a little bit lower. On average, 38.8% of defendants in urban counties in Texas make use of indigent defense services. On the right, on the other hand, you see Texas is 172 rural counties. The shape of the graph is quite different. You can see it pushed over much more to the left with these tall dark bars on the left, because when you look at rural counties in Texas, the rate at which people actually use indigent defense services is significantly lower, statistically significantly lower. So in rural counties, about 25% of defendants actually use indigent defense services. So that's the kind of evidence that we were interested in. You immediately see that this right, which ought to be afforded equally across the country, no matter where you are, nevertheless, if you are in a rural area, the rate at which people actually use indigent defense services is clearly lower. This is using data from Texas, and I should say, of course, and it's on the screen, this was published in collaboration with my colleague and friend, Alyssa Lark. What we also found in this research, however, so message number one, if you're in a rural place, there is at least prima facie evidence that the availability of indigent defense services might be lower. And one can imagine why that might be. Maybe it's difficult in practical terms, the services. What we also found in this research, however, message number two, was this number. This number by itself on the screen won't mean very much. What this number represents, though, is when we look at the rural counties in Texas, those counties, in other words, where the rate of access to counsel is lower. And then within those, we separate out the counties that have a public defender office. We found that those rural counties in Texas that had a public defender office had access to counsel rates roughly 11 points higher. You may have remembered that rural counties here have the rate at which defendants are accessing counsel is about 14% lower than if you are in an urban area. However, if one of those rural counties has a public defender office, its active counsel rate is 1% higher. So having a public defender office in a rural county in Texas seems almost entirely to make up for that it is a place and it gets people that access to counsel rate after all. We don't know very much about why that is. There are lots of possible explanations. And so we went to the Texas Bar Foundation. We asked them to fund these 3 extra steps that would allow us to find out what is it about public defender offices which apparently create higher rates of access to counsel in these rural places. Is this a piece of advice, in other words, that we should be giving to rural places? Start a public defender office. It will improve access to counsel rates for you. We thought that it might be more complicated than that. So the Texas Bar Foundation generously funded our research to acquire more data, to do a historical analysis, and to interview people in counties. And I want to pass it over to Dr. Smiegocki now, who will show you a couple of the early results from the research before we move on to our panel discussion.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Davies. So if we move to the next slide, what we see here is access to counsel for felony cases. And we looked at a couple of regional offices. So this is B County, which actually represents defendants in a couple of counties, as well as Starr County. But we also have Burnett County and Willacy County, which actually created individual public defender offices. And these dashed lines here actually show when a public defender office was opened in that county. So we're just looking at general trends at this point, and right now it's a visual descriptive context. But what we're trying to look for is, when you're looking at that dashed line, do you immediately see a spike in the access to counsel afterwards, or maybe it's a delayed spike, or what kind of patterns are we seeing? So when we look at the felony access to counsel, we actually see that not much changes. Now in Willacy County, we see a couple of bumps, and in some of these smaller counties within the regional office, we see an occasional spike, but there's no clear pattern. For the most part, we see that in felony cases, the access to counsel is kind of steady, or it's an occasional spike. Now, when we move over to the misdemeanor cases, on the next slide, we actually see a difference. So here, just visually speaking, is once you see past these dotted lines that the access to counsel actually increases. So what we're trying to do now is, this is, like I said, a visual descriptive piece. We're looking at it visually to see, is there actually a change in the access to counsel from before a county opens a public defender office and afterwards. But now we're trying to move into a heavier statistical complex method so that we can actually conclusively say, do public defender offices increase this access to counsel? So I'm going to turn it back to Dr. Davies for that.
Thank you very much. So that is what we want to share with you, just to kick off the conversation. Questions about how do people in rural areas actually get access to counsel for defendants who are too poor to hire a lawyer? How do they overcome these logistical obstacles? And given what we know, at least initially from the statistics that we were showing, it does appear that these challenges are indeed greater in rural areas, but it also does appear possibly that public defender offices, that kind of infrastructure might represent at least a partial solution. But the truth is that doesn't actually tell us very much. We can't simply go around and tell people public defender offices and think that'll be a panacea. That would be frankly naive. It's much more likely that the circumstances of building a public defender office and the people who work in them and the work that they do and the efforts that they bring to their work are really what is key to making the differences that these statistics are portraying. So with that in mind, I am delighted to now introduce our panelists. And if I do it without them blushing too much, I will actually go through their biographies. We have Ms. Linda Gonzalez, born and raised in a small town in Mexico, and moved permanently to the United States with her parents when she was about 7 years old. She's the youngest of 9 siblings, happily married with 2 children. Linda graduated in 2005 from Florida State University with a degree in psychology and from St. Mary's Law School in San Antonio in 2009. Out of school, she prosecuted felonies for the 229th Judicial District's Attorney's Office for about 3 years. After her stint in prosecution, she entered into private federal and state criminal defense work. In 2016, Linda joined the Texas RioGrande Legal Aid's Public Defender Division as a staff attorney. Soon after, she became first assistant and then became the chief defender for the Starr County Regional Public Defender in January 2018. She didn't always dream of becoming a lawyer. It has turned out to be a wild and rewarding ride, she writes. So from the southern border of Texas, we have Ms. Gonzalez. From the country's northern border, we have Mr. Stephen Button from St. Lawrence County, New York. St. Lawrence County, in case anybody knows, is the largest county in New York. And if I'm not mistaken, Stephen, is about the 5th largest east of the Mississippi. I think you yourself may have taught before. It's roughly twice the size of Rhode Island. Mr. Button serves as the St. Lawrence County attorney, a position he's held since 2015. He's originally from the Dallas, Texas area and is a graduate twice over of Baylor University. He's been a practicing litigator for 13 years. Following graduation from Western New England University School of Law in 2006, Mr. Button took a position with a law firm based out of Willimantic, Connecticut, focusing his practice in workers' compensation, social security, civil litigation, and government representation. In 2009, Mr. Button started assistant public defender in the St. Lawrence County Office of the Public Defender. In 2011, he was appointed to a term as the chief public defender in that office, a position he held until his appointment as county attorney in February of 2015. During his tenure as county attorney, he's worked to establish a program to remediate potentially environmentally contaminated properties in conjunction with the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. In 2016, for his work on behalf of indigent defense and fighting county unfunded mandates under the 5th and 6th Amendment of the United States Constitution, Mr. Button was the co-recipient of the New York State Defenders Association Subject Award with Deputy Majority Leader Senator John DeFrancisco, a Republican from Syracuse, New York, and Assemblywoman Patricia P. Albany. Fated names indeed. And last but not least, we have Mr. T. Coyne, the public defender for the city of Winchester and counties of Clark, Frederick, Page, Shenandoah, and Warren in the state of Virginia. He received his undergraduate degree from the University of Virginia in 1983 and graduated from the T.C. Williams School of Law at the University of Richmond in 1986. Following graduation from law school, Tim worked pro se law clerk for the U.S. District Court for the Eastern District of Virginia in Alexandria, handling civil rights actions and habeas corpus petitions filed by prisoners. He then worked as a litigation attorney for the Federal Trade Commission in Washington, D.C. And in 1991, Tim and his wife, Beth, moved to Winchester, Virginia to start their own private law practice. He worked as a part-time assistant public defender in Front Royal and Winchester until 1995 and continued to take state and federal court-appointed cases, leaving the public defender's office. In 2004, Tim was appointed as the public defender for the Winchester office. He also served on the Winchester City Council from 2000 to 2008 and has been actively involved in many community boards and organizations. He's currently vice chairman of the Northern Shenandoah Valley Substance Coalition, a diverse community-based organization looking for ways to address the opioid epidemic plaguing the Northern Shenandoah Valley. Tim and his wife have 2 children, Ryan and Ellen. Thank you all very much for joining us here today. I hope I didn't mispronounce too many of the various place names that I came across in biographies, but they are certainly a testament to your rich experience. I would like to begin, I shall trade off with Victoria and we shall ask questions. I would like to begin simply by giving the opportunity for those present to please, could you describe your jurisdictions to us? Could you tell us about where you come from, how large they are, how many people there are, what are the kind of criminal justice and social service agencies you work with, and of course, of particular interest, what interactions you have with international borders and tribal lands. I wonder if I could start with Mr. Button.
Certainly. Thank you, Andy, for the introduction. Obviously, I appreciate all of our time together and this opportunity to be able to speak to other colleagues. St. Lawrence County is a county, as Dr. Davies identified, on the northern border with Canada. It's a very unique location. It is, as Dr. Davies identified, larger than the state of Rhode Island. It has about 123,000 people that live in the county and call it home. In addition to bordering the Canadian border with Ontario, we also connect with the Quebec provincial border, as well as have a conjunction with the Akwesasne Mohawk Reservation. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Akwesasne Mohawk Reservation, it is the only location on the northern border in which an individual theoretically can pass from Canadian territory through to American territory without having to theoretically pass through a border checkpoint. As a result, there is a fair amount of activity flowing from both Montreal and Ottawa down through the Akwesasne Mohawk Reservation, through St. Lawrence County, and to all points south. There are 3 major prisons that are located in St. Lawrence County. Those 3 tend to be major employers in the area, so we are a fairly pro-law enforcement area. We are a very cold area, very spread out area. We have 32 municipalities, each having their own individual courts, although a couple of them have consolidated over the course of the past few years. So for our public defenders, our district attorneys, and those who regularly practice in the local justice courts, they're fairly spread out. We have a county court, we have a Supreme Court, with the Supreme Court having specialty parts as well. So our practitioners are not only engaged in the local justice courts, but they are engaged in the superior courts within the county seat, which is Canton, New York. Canton, New York, the county seat, has roughly 10,000 people for the population. In a 10-mile radius, there are 4 universities, 2 of which are considered essentially semi-Ivy League, and 2 of which are State University of New York products. So a very diverse body of individuals in this area up on the northern border.
Thank you, Mr. Button. Mr. Coyne, I wonder if I could turn to you. Could you, would you do us the honor of introducing us to your jurisdiction?
Absolutely, and thank you for having me as a part of this panel. I'm glad to be here. So the 6 jurisdictions that Dr. Davies mentioned are located in the northwest corner of Virginia, in the northern Shenandoah Valley. So it's a pretty wide geographic area. I don't know if it's as large as St. Lawrence County. I doubt it, but it too is diverse. The total population of those 6 jurisdictions is about 225, maybe 250,000 people. The city of Winchester, where I am now, is the urban center, if you will, and that's only about 28,000 people. And the counties that I serve they're diverse in terms of their populations, their demographics. Some are very poor. There's just not a lot of industry. Some are very agricultural. And we also feel the influx of the Northern Virginia and Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. We have 2 interstates that run through my jurisdictions. Interstate 66 runs from here to Washington, D.C., and Interstate 81 runs from Buffalo, I believe, all the way down to Atlanta in that area. So what that means is that we get a lot of drug trafficking coming in from Washington, D.C., Baltimore, to the extent that this part of Interstate 81 is known as the heroin highway. And that results in many different cases that we have to deal with. I've got 3 jails in my area, 2 regional jails and 1 local jail. We do not have any state prisons. Only 1 university that's not even close to Ivy League, but it serves our community well. And that's sort of my area in a nutshell.
Thank you. And same question to you, Ms. Gonzalez.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here. I'm so thrilled to be a part of this panel, and I hope that our viewers get some valuable information out of this session. So I'm the Chief Public Defender for a tri-county region. We are on the southernmost tip of Texas. Our largest county, which is the county of Starr, has a population of about 65,000, and it borders Mexico. Our other 2 counties are not on the border with Mexico. They're significantly smaller than Starr. They're Duval and Jim Hogg counties, Duval having roughly 11,000 in population, and Jim Hogg County roughly about 5,000 in population. They're very small, very rural. And Starr County, I think historically has always been one of the poorest counties in the state of Texas. So we are on a corridor that is known for drug trafficking and human smuggling. We also, in these 3 areas, particularly in Jim Hogg counties and Starr County, we have a very, very heavy Border Patrol and ICE presence, as well as state police. So also a very, I think, just it's unique in that sense. There's a lot of law enforcement presence. And so in addition to that, I think that something that's very unique about our service area is that we have a lot of people coming through who end up in the criminal justice system who are non-US citizens and who are not English speakers. So that is something that that poses obviously some challenges to defending them appropriately and effectively. And so we've worked hard to try to correct that, but that's generally what our service area is like.
Thank you, Ms. Gonzalez. And actually, just jumping off what you just said and bringing up challenges, I'd like to jump into the logistics of providing representation to your clients. So I'm going to start with Mr. Coyne, but I'd like to ask everyone to answer is, can you please describe what logistical challenges, maybe distance, the use of technology, that you face providing representation to your clients, and also how your office has implemented policies to maybe help tackle these problems?
Sure. Being in a rural area obviously has a lot of logistical problems with just keeping in contact from clients and getting to court, showing up on time, from our ability for them to come into our office and meet with us. Particularly with COVID, that's been especially difficult. So we've had to go to other things like telephone interviews, which are not ideal, but that's the way we've had to do it, to try to limit the number of people in our office. The distance is a challenge. One regional jail that's very close in the city of Winchester, but the other regional jail is about 20 some miles, and the other jail is 45 miles. And then many of our clients are held in outlying jurisdictions, sometimes upwards of a 2-hour drive away just to go see them. If they're incarcerated, they're often held on other charges in other jurisdictions. So keeping in contact with our clients is really difficult and challenging. Many of them are transient. They have, obviously they're indigent, so housing, transportation are huge issues. Just keeping current information on them is a huge challenge. Just today, we just implemented a text messaging notification system that some of our offices have utilized. So we're hoping, because all of our clients, most of them do have cell phones, that hopefully that'll help keep in contact with them, remind them of court dates, things like that. So we'll see how that goes, but that's the most recent kind of technological thing we've implemented.
That's very interesting. Ms. Gonzalez, do you have anything to say?
Sure. To echo what Mr. Coyne has just described, we have a lot of those same or similar issues. I guess I would add also, it's been my experience working in these rural areas that the jurisdictions or the staff in the criminal justice system, they have a lot of difficulty implementing new systems. And so particularly during COVID times, it's been very difficult to describe to the courts and their staff the importance of our clients having access to their hearings. A lot of our clients are very, very poor, and they don't have, they definitely don't have computers. They don't have scanners. They don't have faxes. A lot of them don't even have cell phones. And so even appearing for court these days has proven very, very challenging, and describing these obstacles to all of the players involved has been very challenging. In addition to that, so our counties we have our main office is located in one of our service counties, but the other two, we have a satellite office in one of them, but we don't have an office in a third county. And so promptly making contact with our clients when we are appointed to represent them is certainly very challenging because of the distance. We don't have attorneys that live in those areas. And so we have to rely very heavily on our investigators and our support staff to maintain the attorneys abreast of any new developments that are going on in those counties. And we've implemented systems to try to get in contact with our clients in those further areas as quickly as possible. But it certainly has been very, very challenging.
Thank you for that. And Mr. Button, would you like to add anything?
You know, when you asked the question of the other two panelists, I was thinking back on the past 10 years. And if you had asked me this question 10 years ago, my answer probably would have been, logistically, we have a significant lack of resources. We have a lack of funding. We have a lack of support politically. I would have told you in 2009, 2010, that as a result of New York State's patchwork quilt type operation of indigent defense delivery dependent upon a county system, that you were going to wind up with discrepancies with respect to the delivery of such a system. But you know, New York State made some massive strides in 2009 by the creation of the New York State Office of Indigent Legal Services. They brought in a guy from the state of Massachusetts named Bill Leahy, who a real visionary and had some great ambition for what he saw for the system. And at the time, we had litigation that was going on that had been commenced in 2007 that culminated in a settlement in 14, and then in 15 and 16, the development of funding from the state for rural counties in specific, but really all counties across the state for counsel at first appearance. So logistically, we started to receive more resources. Now, our problem isn't necessarily resources. Obviously, from an indigent defense perspective, we could still utilize quite a bit more resources from the state. But our problem ends up being much like what Linda described, which is in our rural areas, we don't have many attorneys that have decided to call this home, that want to stay here and provide the assistance. And because we happen to be in hotspot areas for the transmission of drugs to the southern reaches, Tim, just so that you're aware, 81 travels all the way up to Watertown, which is just south of the border of St. Lawrence County. So those drugs that I mentioned might be flowing from Montreal or Ontario, or most likely passing down 81, as you described it, the heroin corridor. So that has been a shifting target for, I think, rural areas in New York State definitively, being that, 10 years ago, I would have said it's a lack of resources. Now that we've got the funding starting to flow from the various state agencies and specifically the oversight being provided by ILS, the lobbying efforts from the New York State Defenders Association, now we're finding just practical difficulties finding people that want to perform the work.
Mm-hmm. Thank you all for those informative responses. I wonder if I can come back to you then, Linda, on the question of recruitment. Obviously, we recognize from a statistical perspective, there just aren't very many lawyers outside of big cities. That's true the nation over. How do you try to tackle the issue of getting qualified, enthusiastic staff to your office? And what kind of a challenge has that been?
Yes, Doctor. So I've been doing this now for about 4 years. I've been in this particular public defender office for about 4 years, and so I've seen a number of attorneys come through our office. We've been very fortunate to have a lot of very highly qualified attorneys, and we've been fortunate to have a lot of young, energized trailblazers, like those attorneys that come fresh out of law school that just knew going into law school and graduating from law school that they wanted to be in the public service arena, and that they wanted to become public defenders. So we've been very lucky to get some of those attorneys that just come to these rural areas and they stay because they love the work, because they feel very passionately that this is where they belong, that this is where they can make the most impact, that this is where they are needed the most. And so I've kind of seen a pattern. The people who have that fire in them, who are not natives from this region, are the ones that tend to stay a little longer, or have stayed longer, and they've done tremendous work. However, that's not the case for everyone, and even some of our attorneys who have come through who are very, very zealous about this work, there's no nightlife here. We don't have pretty sidewalks to go on leisurely strolls in the afternoons. There's not a lot of diversity. There's not a lot of cultural diversity. So I think that there are a lot of things that unfortunately turn people off to the possibility of living here for a long period of time, or for staying here permanently. So it has proven to be very challenging. We have what we do is, through our organization, through Texas RioGrande Legal Aid, what we have done is we try to post job openings, in as many venues as possible. We try to disseminate this information as much as possible, but we don't always get a lot of applicants. And when we do, once they kind of come visit or find out where we're located, they don't want to stick around. And one thing that I think is very important is so I'm originally from this area, and so I think it's important for some of our attorneys or some of our staff to be local, because we understand the nuances and the particularities of the region. We understand the culture. A lot of us, or most of us who are natives from this area, speak Spanish fluently. And so it's good to have a group of these individuals in our particular office, but it's also important to get people who are not from here. I want attorneys and staff to come from other areas so that they don't care if they have to stand up to the judge, and represent our client, because that's what our client deserves and needs. I don't want them to be afraid to stand up to the judge because, he's related to my uncle and my, or things like that, the small town issues that attorneys often are faced with when practicing before a judge. And so, and also they bring in another perspective, right? So it's important to have that kind of diversity in a public defender office, in my opinion. And it hasn't been easy to always to achieve that. What I have found has, besides feeling very passionately about doing public defense work, another thing that I think keeps people here is we have really good tacos, number one, but also we try to have a culture in our office that makes people feel like they're part of a family. We try to, it's a small office. I think I supervise about 10 employees. And so it's a small office, and we try to work on cases together. And we meet often, we share meals together, we know about each other's personal lives. And so what I tell applicants when I'm interviewing them is, you will have an opportunity to come make a huge difference. There's a lot of room to make a significant and lasting impact in this in the realm of public defense and criminal justice in this area by working in our region. You will feel, or we will strive to make you feel like you are part of a family here. There's really good food. You're right on the border with Mexico if you want to travel, if travel is one of your interests. And in addition to that, because we are a small, because of these are small jurisdictions, there is room for gaining experience that's very valuable that you may not gain in a larger jurisdiction, where attorneys have to put in their time, and usually a long time, doing misdemeanor work, for example, before they are able to even touch a felony case. Here we say, listen, if you're interested in doing some felony work, we will mentor you throughout that process, and you can gain very valuable experience by working here. And so that's usually how we have handled that situation.
Thank you, Linda. I wonder if I could ask you, Mr. Coyne, related question. Where do you see attorneys coming to you from? And do you think, are there pipelines that you've been able to build to increase the supply?
It's really difficult. Hiring and retention of attorneys is probably one of the biggest challenges that I face. I've been public defender for 16 years. I've probably hired 25 to 30 attorneys over that period of time. Some good attorneys, young, energetic, passionate, really want to do this work, and I can give them experience. But after about a year or two, they get the experience. There's just not a whole lot of opportunity to move up, and they get better paying opportunities across the aisle in the Commonwealth Attorney's offices, for example, which receive local supplements. So they get paid 20% more on average than I do for the same level position. The attorneys that I look for when I'm hiring usually are recent grads that have interned in a public defender office, have done this kind of work, and know what it's like to have to work with this population, and have shown a passion for doing the work. But our salaries are lower compared to prosecutors. Even within my agency, just over the mountain, maybe the next closest office 30 miles away from me, they get a $5,000 per position supplement from the state because they're considered part of Northern Virginia. So I have competition within my own agency to attract people to want to work out here in the more rural area. And as Linda was talking about, it's, while I love Winchester, I've been here almost 30 years, Victoria has seen Winchester. We don't have tacos, we have apples and Apple Blossom Festival, and it's a very nice community. But for somebody who's just starting out and doesn't have a family, there's not a whole lot to do. You've really got to find some things to do. So keeping people in this area after they get that experience, and I can offer them misdemeanor and felony experience pretty quickly with proper training and get them working on cases that maybe in an urban office they wouldn't get to see for several years just because of the needs and size of my office. But it's really difficult to keep really good people for a long time and make them career defenders.
Thank you very much, Mr. Coyne. Mr. Button, I know you've had an approach in your county of developing if I'm not mistaken, a kind of a mentoring program. I wonder if you could describe some of the efforts you've put together to try and attract and keep lawyers.
I sure can. And I have to agree with Tim and with Linda. We experienced a very similar type of situation. We had those individuals who were destined to get into public defense, the people that I affectionately refer to as the believers, those folks who were going to come this way no matter what. And we had those younger attorneys who were fresh out of law school looking for quick experience and wanting to bounce. And this was a common difficulty that not only our office, but other offices similarly situated with the New York State were experiencing. And it's difficult for a rural county to compete with many of the urban environments like a Syracuse or a Buffalo or a New York City that can offer a significantly enhanced extracurricular activity in life than perhaps the Apple Festival or the Dairy Princess Festival that we have up here in St. Lawrence County. Knowing that, it became apparent to me that we needed to try to start focusing our efforts on developing young attorneys that would want to come back home rather than come to a new home. As I mentioned, we live in an area that has 4 universities. That's actually a great opportunity for us to develop a mentoring program, internship program, so that we could start to cultivate that type of interest in young individuals before they went to law school, so that upon completion of law school, they had an opportunity to return to an area that they had always called home. So that's exactly what we did. We developed both an internship program associated with the undergraduate offerings that were here in the Canton and Potsdam areas of St. Lawrence County. They continue to this day, even though I've been outside of the public defender's office now for the past 5 years, but it has been expanded not only from our public defender's office, but to our DSS legal office, our county attorney's office, as well as to our conflict defender's office and our district attorney's office. We have found success in developing young individuals who have grown up in the area, gone to school in the area, who go off to law school, who wish to return to this area. And upon completion of their law school period, chances are during their first year as 1Ls or as 2Ls, they have returned to the county to do some form of legal internship. Upon completion of their law degree and while they're awaiting bar results after taking the bar exam, we oftentimes will have them come in, make application for them to practice under a practice order with one of the appellate departments. Specifically for us, that's the third department, appellate division for our area. And those young attorneys who are awaiting their results have an opportunity to get some experience on the ground with seasoned attorneys who have been doing it for a while. And upon receipt of the results and swearing in, are immediately able to hit the ground. So we are now putting a significant investment of time in a younger group of folks who have a definitive connection and tie to the geographical area.
Thank you, Mr. Button, for that. And I'd just like to reiterate to everyone that the Deason Center actually has a report, Greening the Desert, which talks about these challenges of recruiting attorneys. And our staff attorney, Kenitra Brown, actually just dropped that into the chat. So if you'd like to check it out, please feel free. But I'd like to actually change topics a little bit. And this has been mentioned before, is the idea of political opposition. And I'd like to start with you, Ms. Gonzalez, since Starr County's regional office actually opened in the past few years. And I was wondering, what opposition did you face in terms of like opening the office, maybe increasing your budget, or other substantial changes that you want to make to indigent defense in your jurisdiction? What kind of opposition do you face, or even whose buy-in and support do you need to be successful?
Sure. So the particular way that our office is set up is probably a little different than maybe Stevens and Tim's, but our office is funded in part by the Texas Indigent Defense Commission. It's state funding, and the county or local counties, the three of them, have to all agree to fork up the remainder of that total budget. And so it's about roughly 2/3 being provided by the state agency, and the remaining 1/3 provided by the counties. So that's just generally the setup for our funding. But from the inception of this office, there have been a wide variety of obstacles. The first came from probably opposition from the local defense bar, the private defense bar, because of course the previous system of appointment of counsel for indigent defendants, criminal defendants, was the judges would appoint attorneys from the private bar, and they would get paid fees, not very high fees, but still, I imagine that, you know, some of the attorneys who were getting a lot of these court appointments were getting significant fees, you know, once they started to add up. And so that was one of our biggest challenges, was that the private defense bar, I think, was probably putting a lot of pressure on our local politicians to oppose the public defender coming into our service area. Another big obstacle came from our elected district attorney. I think that and some of our elected prosecutors generally, actually, because when our public defenders started getting cases and working them, of course, we strive to provide high quality representation, and that means, you know, filing, you know, just having a more robust motions practice, and, you know, having contested hearings regularly or more often, and just generally ensuring that our clients' rights are being protected, basic rights that were not necessarily being protected in the past for whatever reason. And so we started coming in, for example, and asking that our hearings be translated appropriately on the record for our clients who didn't speak Spanish. So something as basic as that started to ruffle a lot of feathers, because ensuring that our clients' rights are met means that changes have to be made to the current systems, but also, of course, it means money. And so, and I don't think that money issues are exclusive to my region. I imagine that we all probably are familiar with the restrictions or constrictions, rather, of you know, of budgets, you know, in the criminal justice area or realm. And so we got a lot of pushback about things like that. You know, we were coming in and we were saying, we will not go forward in this hearing unless and until my clients understanding the proceedings, until the proceedings are being properly translated for him on the record. And so just things like that, just as an example. So we have faced a lot of political opposition, you know, throughout the course of our existence. It's which is another factor that ties into the difficulty of hiring prospects, because we cannot ensure our applicants that we will be here for a long time, because every year our contract is up for review and approval by our commissioners courts, and they have to be approved by the county judges. And so all of these have been pretty big challenges. I think that by now we've been here for a little over 4 years, going on 4.5 years in all three, you know, counties. And I think that by now the judges and all of the stakeholders, all of the politicians and everyone else, even the private defense bar, has grown to understand the importance of a public defender system. I think that they know that when we go into court, we go in prepared. We try to work with our judges and with all of our magistrates and all of the players, you know, within the criminal justice system we try to coordinate with them to educate them if they have questions or doubts about things that we are asking for, that we want, you know, to have implemented, that they are unfamiliar with. A lot of the judges, you know, now know that if they have a question about anything that has to do with indigent defense, that they can come to us. And the same goes for the private bar. They know that they can count on us to assist them in any way that we can if they have any questions or if they need help. So I think that by now we've probably established ourselves maybe a little with a little more certainty than those beginning years. I anticipate that these political challenges will continue to arise, but I also think that with the passage of time, the community has become more aware of our role here. And precisely because they're small towns, word gets around fairly quickly. And so I know that when we first started, you know, it felt really nice whenever, you know, our investigators would go to the jail and everyone, all the inmates, I want the public defender, you know, I mean, it was wonderful. When people know now, I think that we're here to ensure that criminal defendants who are too poor to hire their own counsel will have representation that is equal to or better than if they were able to pay for an attorney. So that's been our experience here.
Perfect. Thank you, Ms. Gonzalez. And Mr. Coyne, I'd actually like to ask you the same question, since you're coming from a more well-established office and you've said you've been working there for 16 years. Do you see that you're facing the kind of political opposition that Ms. Gonzalez is seeing?
No, not in what Linda just described. We don't face that same kind of opposition from the judges or courts or even other court-appointed attorneys, because we're established. My office has been in existence since 1987, so it's been around for a while. And we have a total of 26 public defender offices in the Commonwealth of Virginia. That serves approximately 1/2 of the total jurisdictions in the state. So there are not public defender offices everywhere, and we are funded primarily by the state legislature. We have to get budgeted every year, and getting increases has been probably the biggest political difficulty over the years, just trying to get increased funding for salaries or increased positions. I don't know how closely anybody follows Virginia politics, but there has been a recent change, very positive for criminal justice matters. And in fact, at the beginning, our legislature meets beginning of the year. We got through a proposal to increase by 59 attorney positions throughout our system, which was the largest increase ever. We haven't had attorney increases like that in 10 years. COVID hit, the budget went in the tank, and those were unallocated. So it's still uncertain, but we're hopeful that kind of political change is going to stay and continue. Our localities do have the authority and ability to help supplement our offices. And some of my colleague offices over in Northern Virginia, for example, where the counties and jurisdictions are a bit wealthier, do supplement. I presently have put in a request to all 6 of my local jurisdictions for a total of about $110,000 just to add salary supplements for my entire staff to try to bring us a little closer to what our counterparts in the Commonwealth Attorney's offices, prosecutors' offices make. But I got to go through 6 different budget processes. So I'll see what kind of political opposition I face in that respect. And in terms of just this last point, in terms of the creation of new public defender offices, that has experienced some challenges, primarily coming from, as Linda mentioned, defense attorneys private defense attorneys who take court-appointed cases don't necessarily want to see a public defender office come in and start taking that work. What I would say to that is we become a resource and a very positive influence in the community and there's still work for the private attorneys to take because we have conflicts and we can't handle every single case. So there's still a place for them, but that's some of the political considerations.
Thank you, Mr. Coyne. And Mr. Button, I know that in New York, there's been a large influx of funds that are coming in for indigent defense, and I think you're particularly involved in that. So what kind of challenges or opposition did you face in terms of getting that off the ground and being successful?
So in order to answer the question, I'll give it a little historical perspective. Our public defender's office here in St. Lawrence County was created in 1995. And just as Tim identified, just as Linda identified, the initial opposition did not come necessarily from your R's or D's in the political legislature. It came from on-the-ground attorneys who were opposed to the potential loss of revenue from having an established office. So I can definitely sympathize with that. When I came in 2009, though, it was clearly already established. The largest problem that our office faced between 1995 and 2009 was something I think Linda touched on, which was this sort of uncertainty that the legislature would continue to keep our public defender office floating around. We went through 9 public defenders between 1995 and 2009. When I came into the office, one of the first things, I'll never forget it, I was sitting before the Board of Legislators on the day of my swearing in, and they identified to me that I shouldn't expect to get any additional funding. Any money that I needed, I should go out and find on my own. Good luck, God bless, and don't let the door hit you on the way out. And I definitely took it to heart, but I looked at my predecessors and what their arguments have been. And I realized that my predecessors had been largely arguing position points that would have been favorable to the new Virginia state legislature, or more specifically the Virginia governor, than would have been to the rural communities. And as I indicated before, New York State is based on this patchwork quilt of county-run indigent defense operations. And so I needed to find an argument that I could tailor specifically to my geographical area, not one that necessarily I would have found a sympathetic audience in Albany or a sympathetic audience down in New York City. One of the things, having grown up here, that I knew, those nuances, those colloquialisms that you become accustomed with about this area, is that my area is a predominantly deep red area. You don't really think about that when you think about New York State, but it is a deep red, more like Western Texas area, more like Lubbock area than it is like New York City. And having grown up in this type of environment, I knew that there was actually strong support for the tenets of indigent defense, the idea that an individual should receive representation in order to potentially avoid wrongful consequence or unjust results. It wasn't until you get to the point that they've actually been convicted that all of a sudden that support sort of drops off. But up until the point of conviction, there was a strong sort of libertarian bent in the area about making sure that people are constitutionally protected. So politically, I knew I needed to marshal an argument that was going to be favorable to the audience I was dealing with. And that argument ended up taking the shape of a constitutional provision grounded in revenue and loss mitigation. And what do I mean by that? One of the first things I did as public defender was I went and I pulled the jail statistics to identify how much our county jail had to pay per inmate per day in which an individual was placed in incarceration. It was $110 a day per inmate to be placed in there. When we were averaging approximately 160 inmates per day, that dollar amount racks up pretty quickly. When I was able to identify that by adding additional attorneys, not only would we not have to pay the same amount that would go out to assigned counsel fees, but B, would be able to reduce the costs of our operations at our local jails, that caught attention. When I added to it the constitutional flair, that libertarian message that an individual, we are upholding the same rights that they so quickly clamored for associated with the Second Amendment, through the Sixth Amendment on representation, it caught ground. Really, it caught fire. And so a predominantly Republican legislative board became staunch advocates for the expansion of indigent services and for the state to take a larger role in it. And that has really, in my mind, been a clear indicator of the success that we experienced here in St. Lawrence County.
Thank you very much. We've got about 9 or 10 minutes left of our scheduled time. And I certainly have a whole list of questions I'd love to ask, but I feel obligated to turn to our Q&A here. Any participant can enter a question into the Q&A. I do urge you to continue to do so. We have one from Madeline Bailey that says, can you discuss the unique obstacles rural counties face to ensuring defense counsel at first? I think it's a very good question. I know, Mr. Button, I want to give everybody a chance to answer it. I know, Mr. Button, that you will have an answer to it. So could I go to you first, please?
Certainly. As I indicated earlier, one of the things that rolled out in 2014 as a result of a lawsuit that involved 5 counties, known as the Earl Herring lawsuit here in New York State, was the development of a statewide delivery system for counsel at first appearance. The Indigent Legal Services Office I also referenced has been responsible for implementing those programs statewide, and they really coordinated with each of the individual counties. But I think, Andy, you and I have had discussions about some of the logistical nightmares that creates. While we want to ensure that everyone is afforded counsel in large geographically situated counties that are incredibly rural, finding attorneys at 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning to drive out for a DWI arraignment, for a drug stop that occurred as they were passing through on their way to 81, it can be very, very difficult. So it runs back into the larger issue that I think rural counties are having, which is where are the attorneys going to come from in order to assist these individuals that need it, especially in the rural areas.
Thank you. Mr. Coyne, I don't know if in Virginia you have the same need to get counsel at first appearance in remote areas. Is this a problem you've had to address, and how have you contended with it?
It varies by the court. So for example, in our circuit courts, which are where jury trials are held, courts of record, counsel is typically present in the courtroom there to take the appointment. So I always have somebody from my office in the circuit courts when they're in session, people being brought in on direct indictments or their first appearance. So And we can sometimes address bond. Sometimes the prosecutor will say, well, we're not ready. We didn't know this person was going to be brought in, but we can at least schedule a quick turnaround for a bond hearing. In our courts, where a lot of our clients come from, which are district courts, the judges typically will just deal with the appointment of counsel, maybe address bond, but then we do have the opportunity to get a fairly quick date for a bond hearing. So we have a rule in my agency, in my office, we have to see incarcerated clients within 48 hours of receiving the appointment. So we make an effort, we get up to the jail, we see them, we try to get them scheduled for a bond hearing as quickly as we can. So while it may not be, there's not counsel there for that first appearance in front of the judge, we certainly are very aware and make every effort to try to get a quick hearing so we can get them out on bond as quickly as we can.
So I feel we're just at this moment hitting a rich vein of questioning because we're getting some more into the chat. And I wonder if I can ask Ms. Gonzalez this related question to this issue of getting counsel at first appearance. Suzanne Strong asks, is pretrial detention a problem? How long are clients waiting before your office is made aware of the arrest and where they are detained? Is that something we've had to logistically contend with, Ms. Gonzalez, to actually get in contact with clients quickly enough?
Yes, unfortunately, we are faced with a situation where our magistrates, so in Texas and in my service area, justices of the peace are typically the officials who go to the jails to set bail, and they are the ones who do the inquiry of the criminal defendant to see if they want counsel appointed. And so ideally, we should be able to step in right then. But unfortunately, we are still, even 4.5 years later, we're still having to educate a lot of our magistrates about handling this process, doing it regularly and doing it the way it's supposed to be done. And so very often, by the time we find out that someone's been in custody, they've been in custody a while. We still do not get all of the magistrates to send over the forms appointing us. So the way we've resolved that is we have our investigators from our office go to the jail regularly. And so we do our own screening, and that's the way that we make contact. But again, also because of geographical distance, and because we don't have attorneys present in all of our service area, physically present there all the time, that there is a challenge also between, whenever we do get appointed, the first person that someone sees from our office is not an attorney all the time. By the time an attorney gets out there to go visit the client at the jail, it's, sometimes more than 48 hours have passed, and that's obviously not ideal. So we are working hard to try to close that gap and try to get out there as soon as possible in every instance. But there definitely are obstacles that we have been faced with, and we're working on improving.
Much appreciated. Thank you very much. Now, I regret very much that we are at the end of our time. We have several questions that have come into the Q&A. They're coming in as I speak, in fact. What we will do is we will collate the questions. We will email them to our presenters. If anybody feels they want to respond, they can certainly do that. We've got some wonderful ideas and suggestions and inquiries on a diversity of issues here, from retaining lawyers in rural places to dealing with conflicts of interest in rural places, something we weren't even able to really get to today. But really, because I don't want to intrude on people's time more than we said we would, and because we've been immensely generous and our audience immensely loyal, I just want to thank Mr. Button, Mr. Coyne, and Ms. Gonzalez for joining us today. It's been tremendously enriching. These kinds of conversations, as I hope Dr. Smiegocki and I sort of indicated, our research only takes so far, and then it's bringing those findings and getting into conversation with people who can actually tell us what they see in them. That is often the meaningful thing that we can do actually as researchers. So that was our hope, and certainly we got that out of this session, and I hope it was useful and interesting to you all also. But it only really remains for me to say thank you very much. We will, of course, keep everybody apprised as our research continues to develop. And thank you especially for doing the work that you do, for being out there on the ground, for continuing with the political slings and arrows that you were able to describe to us, and for sustaining the Sixth Amendment rights of criminal defendants across the country. Thank you very much.
Happy to do it.
Thank you for having us. Doing this.
Thank you.